All right. Welcome everyone that's tuning in, whether you're on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook. Welcome to Manufacturing Happy Hour. So to everyone on the call, everyone on video, cheers. Welcome. Looking forward to a fun conversation. And to properly kick things off, I want to. I love that, Jake. Excellent with the can sound. I want to make sure we introduce a couple of our astute guests this afternoon. So, for those of you joining us from the Automate Forward event, Jake and I have been hosting midday meetups all week, but this is our special happy hour event. And we're going to be talking about automation in the beer world. And we are joined by Craig Mikoski, the president and head brewer at Round Trip Brewing in Atlanta, as well as Matt Vincent, the president at Ska Fabricating, who are leaders in depalletizers for multiple beverage applications. We're excited to have you guys here. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers, guys.
And I'm going to get into the first question here in a minute, but for anyone that's tuning in, whether you're on LinkedIn, whether you're on YouTube, we can see the comments that you're bringing in. We're going to try to do some Q&A later on in this conversation. But first and foremost, if you're joining us with a beverage, certainly let us know what you're drinking as well. We want to hear from all of you. And actually, that's going to be the first question before we get rolling. So, Matt, I'm going to ask you first, what is in your glass?
Currently, I'm drinking a Ska Brewing, of course. I had to self-promote a little bit, a Ska Brewing True Blonde. Golden ale brewed with a little bit of honey.
Awesome. No, it sounds perfect for, I guess, a mid-afternoon beer for where you are out in Colorado. Craig, let's move to you next. What's in your glass?
This is straight out of Munich Helles. It's an export style Helles. It's 5.6%, a little bit more bitter than a normal Helles. And it's kind of what we specialize in here is German stuff and kind of expanding some German beers as well.
Love that.
And these are always served in the nice half-liter signs.
I saw that. Yeah, very, very official across the board. I love it when you get the glassware going with the beer itself. Jake, how about yourself? What have you cracked open?
So this is one that you actually sent me, Chris, on our last Manufacturing Happy Hour event when you sent me the glass that I won, the Allen Bradley glass. I'm drinking a Eagle Park from Brewing Company. It's a Loop Station. It's golden ale. So first time drinking, it's delicious.
Yep, and since I recently moved from California to Milwaukee, I'm going with a 180-gram vinyl. It's a porter with lactose from what do you call it? From Gathering Place Brewery here in Milwaukee. I'm drinking it out of a cellar maker glass from my old home in San Francisco. So trying to cover that across the board. And we are seeing some great beers that other folks are having as well coming in. Jake, feel free to keep flashing those on the screen as we get going with the conversation. Before we jump in to the full fireside chat, I do want to thank Automate Forward for allowing us to put on this event. It's been a great event all week. If you haven't signed up for that, people have been posting that in the comments. Sign up for Automate Forward. It's totally free to learn about the latest and greatest in the automation industry. But we're here to talk about beer. It's the end of the day, like a typical conference trade show. We're wrapping it up with some drinks, and we want to talk shop a little bit. So, first question, I want to get to know both Matt and Craig a little bit more. So Craig, this one's for you. We got introduced recently through our friends down the street from me at Pro Brew. And you've been around the beer world for a while, and you have some big names under your belt that you've worked with. I'd love to hear how Round Trip Brewing got started, which is the latest thing you're focused on.
Yeah. So I went to school here in Georgia. I went to UGA and graduated in 2007, immediately moved to Denver to get into the emerging, or probably one of the most established craft beer cities in the country. So I went there, was really fortunate to land a job at Wynkoop, which is, one of the biggest brew pubs in the country, oldest brew pub in Colorado. So I was there for 4 years, went to the Siebel Institute for Brewing School in Chicago in Germany. And after 4 years in Denver, moved back to my home state of Texas, to Fort Worth, to work at Rar & Sons Brewing. Neighbor of mine's here, great. But yeah, so I was at Robinson's in Fort Worth for 6 years. I was eventually the vice president of operations there, and kind of got a call out of the blue to be the head brewer and vice president of operations at the restart of Celis Brewing Company, which was a really interesting opportunity, and got to work with some amazing equipment down there, which really, kind of opened my eyes to automation, where you can use it in ways that will, either make the brew house more consistent from brewer to brewer, or reduce labor, because brewing is hard as it is. So if you can reduce breaking your back a little bit during the day, it's great. So really that was kind of my introduction to automation, was a lot of really, really nice equipment down there. So when I came to Atlanta to do this, I knew I wanted some automation. But I also, as a startup and smaller budget, knew I couldn't afford all of it. So kind of put the automation where I thought I was getting the biggest bang for the buck, what was going to make the beer the best, which is always number one, and more consistent, and also reduce my labor, because right as of now, I'm mostly a one-man show. I do have a lab manager that works part-time in production and part-time at the bar right now. So the automation helps me just from an aspect of, I can do this without having a big staff here. So that's kind of my journey to start this. And that's the name Round Trip comes from that too, leaving Georgia, having all these great experiences around the country, and then coming back and doing this here. Plus just love travel and put a cool travel theme to it as well.
I love that. I always love hearing. I had a feeling it might have something to do with travel, just based on the logo and the name.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome story. For all the people that are listening in, keep the beer you're drinking coming. I'm glad to see we got so many people joining us right now that are engaged in this. And as we get further, feel free to drop in some Q&A. But Matt, let's jump over to you next. You're kind of a perfect example of automation in this industry. In some regards, because you literally created a piece of equipment for your brewery and ultimately found out other breweries needed this as well and started a business around it. So how did Ska Fabricating get started?
Well, we were kind of an early adopter of the can at Ska Brewing, of putting beer in a can. We started canning in 2003. And at the time, it was 2 cans at a time, grabbing them off the pallet, putting them under a spout and filling them.
I did that.
We did that for about 5 miserable years. And in that process, it gave me a lot of time to sit there and think about, my God, there's got to be a better way. We eventually moved up to an upgraded canning, one of the old cask machines that filled 5 cans at a time, a little bit more automated. But at the time, there just wasn't any machinery designed around automation for that canning lines that small. I mean, the filling process itself was, but the handling to and from the filler were not automated. And I set out to, at first I went and called up a bunch of, depalletizer manufacturers that we were seeing the cans were falling everywhere. It was a complete disaster. And it was one of the first things, the front of the line, like, man, how can we make this better? And calling these depalletizing manufacturers up, they living at 30 cans a minute because they had never heard of anything that small. And I think I remember getting a quote at one point in time for a machine that was like 3 times as big as our entire canning line that we had. And they said, it's $250,000, and for another $50,000, we'll slow it down for you. And so at that point in time, that clearly wasn't an option for us, because budget and space didn't allow that. So I set out to build one for myself, and taught myself some PLC programming and learned about sensors through the brewing process and just how all that works, and built one machine that was made out of pallet rack and garage door track and an old motor we had laying around, and kind of semi-automated that process. And in doing that, had the guys from actually Austin Beer Works come by, and they saw that and they were like, hey, can I make another one of those? And I was like, yeah, sure, why not? I think I can. So they were actually technically my first real customer.
Okay.
And they had enough faith and some money and build them a machine, and built that one machine for them and put a video up on Pro Brewer Forum. And literally the phone just started ringing. People are like, oh, I want one. We'll take one. And so it wasn't anything that I intended to grow into this large business. It was like, yeah, we'll make a couple a year, maybe. Who knows? Who's going to need one? And it just has exploded. I mean, we've built probably almost 800 or a little over 800 of those machines and put them around the world now, and expanded what we do into other levels of automation, and just really tried to take the labor out of the can handling process by using conveyance and other automated machinery to make canning a much easier process.
Well, I love the common theme, removing labor from the process. You know, you guys are both largely did it from the ground up, essentially. You know, and I think we're starting to see, at least my perception, this is kind of what I want to hear from you guys, more adoption of automation, even in like the craft beer industries and things like that. And Craig, I'm going to jump back to you because you were hinting at this a little bit before. There were certain parts of your process that you really wanted to automate. There were other parts that, you know, based on need, cash, etc., you're like, probably not yet. So what aspects of brewing would you say are ripe for automation right out of the gate?
Yeah, you know what's weird with that too, on the brewing side, there is a little bit of weird stigma around automation where I tell people that I have it and they're like, oh, so is it, you know, is that still craft? And that's a weird mentality to be in. And honestly, before I started using automation, just because I was hired in to work at the place, you know, I didn't know much about it. Before I used automation, I kind of had similar feelings probably in the back of my head too about it. But then once you use it, you kind of realize how powerful it is. And some places it's really great, and some places it's more of a nice to have. And honestly, sometimes it can be a little bit of a hindrance too, because automation is only good if it works. If it's automated and it doesn't work, you know, if Matt has an automated decal, but it pushes 2 layers of cans at a time, well, the automation's worse than doing it manually. Yeah, what I do with the brew house, it's I work really, really closely with ProBrew, and they're a great partner, so a great partner. I mean, one of them, their sales guy was down here in the market last week, and we kind of went through some things that need to get worked on still. But yeah, where I wanted it the most was the parts in the brewing where like it's the brewer is just there because he has to be. And I want the brewer to be on site when it's something that the brewer really has to think about. So like, for instance, I don't have any automation on the back end of the brew house, which is knockout into the fermenter, because I want the brewer to be right on top of that, making sure that the temperature is right. We have an oxygen meter, so making sure our oxygen's right going into the fermenter for yeast health. So the brewer is on that, thinking, turning a couple manual valves. And honestly, to automate that, that's a point that costs a lot more. So that's a big cost savings where I don't even really want that much automation. Then on the front end too, on the graining inside, I wouldn't say it's automated. You do have to, or super manual. You do just have to move a hose down into a little funnel so that way the grain will go in. But there's a motor on it, so you know that's not automated, but it's still run by a motor. So yeah, it's a mostly automated system, but I don't have hot dosers. Hot dosers is like a big expense that how much return do you get? It's a little safer. Maybe you get a little bit better mixing, but it's so marginal at that point, and then it's a huge expense too. The biggest thing I would say that's been the best for automation is having remote access to the brew house, being able to log in the connectivity with the E1 access from my laptop, so to either do recipe development from my laptop or to be able to get on my phone, literally anywhere in the world, be able to check out fermenters, make sure fermentation temperatures are right, and being able to adjust them if I had to as well. So that's kind of where we're at. You can spend, obviously as much money as you want on automation, but at some points, sometimes manual, at least in a small operation, sometimes manual can be a little bit better at the beginning. for cost savings plus making sure a brewer is right there when it's something you really have to focus on.
Sure. Well, a lot of good things that stick out in that answer. I'm going to quote one of the things I heard from you want the brewer to be on site when it's something that she or he really needs to think about. And I think that rings true for a lot of what's been going on at this conference for people that are attending. It's the whole point of automation is to allow brain power and allow energy to go into the things that really warranted it. And, when we talk about robotics, for example, we talk about robots are best for the dull, dirty, and dangerous tasks. Get rid of the things that, you don't really need a lot of brain power behind. Remote access to the brew house, that's huge. You mentioned E1. I know a lot of people in our audience are familiar with that. Matt, I'm going to flip it over to you more on the packaging side and the depalletizing side. And after that, Craig, you can jump back in because I know you know some about this as well. But where are you seeing opportunities ripe for automation, or how are you seeing your business evolve and that being a part of it?
One of the most important things on a can filling line is making sure that making sure that the filler runs consistently, and you're always keeping a steady feed of cans to and from the filler. Putting the beer in the can is the most important part. Getting the cans to the machine and to the 6-pack and into the case are less important. So you really want to take those aspects away from the functionality of the line. You want those just to sit there and do their job while the operator can focus on the filling and making sure that the cans are filled properly and the quality is there. So really trying to take out that laborious task of feeding cans to the filler and hand packing cans off. Those are better served by machines. They're easily repeatable tasks, whereas the filling process, beer can be a little bit more temperamental. So you kind of need to pay attention to that a little bit more so you're focused on quality.
Love that. Take away the laborious, easily repeatable tasks. Put the automation on that. Craig, I know you mentioned that you had some experience in this space as well that you might want to talk to as well.
Yeah, and like I said before, I've used a couple of Matt's depals, and whenever we don't have a canning line right now, we use mobile canning, but whenever we do put a canning line, very high likelihood that we're going to use another depal from Scott. But yeah, it's just I think everything that's being said is right. I mean, the filling, making sure that there's low oxygen levels in the cans, making sure the seam is right, because that's a manual process, because you need to cut cans, look at seams, and also go into the lab and make sure your DO is right. And that a lot of that, I mean, you can't be automated unless you spent like $20 million. I mean, so. Yeah. For that stuff, that's the stuff you really have to think about. So if the cans can just get off the pallet and you don't have to be pushing them with the PVC pipe, then that's going to make a huge difference, because for one, you'll have a lot happier employees because your employees aren't beating their head against something. Mm-hmm. But also, hopefully, there's going to be a lot more focus on the things that matter, so that way you have better products in the market.
Awesome. And
so,
Jake,
Craig, I'm going to throw up a question real quick. So we had a question from the audience. Oh, wrong one. So like I said, guys, if you have questions, throw them in the chat below. We love seeing these. So Craig, here's a question for you from Michael. What resources did you use when you were first trying out to figure where and what to automate versus keep manual? So, walk us through that first process. There's a bunch of automation that can happen on, but if there's a small brewer that's happening, where do they find the most success within their process to look at automation?
Well, I mean, that's one thing that I'm just lucky to have brewed for 12 years at 4 different places, now my 5th place. That's I think the resource is just experience. So obviously you could hire a consultant that may know, some of the things that I knew just from doing it that long. But I think it's just an experience thing, working on mostly manual brew houses, and then really my only automated brew house was in Austin, which was a 50-barrel Browcon system. So it's just being in the industry and doing it long enough to where you kind of know what you want. And I'm the brewer as well. So if somebody is an owner and they're trying to automate something, I would make sure that the person that's going to be operating on a day-to-day basis has a pretty good say in whatever you're going to do.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Jake, there's another question that came in around scalability that I think might be good to address. And Matt, maybe we'll start with you on this one, since you get to see a lot of different breweries in your operation, and you're probably working with breweries when they're starting to scale up. So, I can read the question. It's, I imagine automation comes into the equation heavily when breweries are considering scalability, like for widespread distribution or a popular beer to increase demand, to meet increased demand. So how do these breweries scale? Like, how does that work when it comes to the things that you guys are doing?
You can only squeeze so much out of a lemon on a small canning line. So at some point in time, you need to be looking at the equipment that does focus around the canning line. And when you're talking to your vendors, understand what the capabilities of that equipment is and how scalability. I mean, unfortunately, sometimes it's just you're going to run a canning line or a packaging line to a point where you just can't get any more out of it, and you got to look to upgrade. In our particular piece of machining, our depalletizer, we did design some scalability into it. However, we have found a lot of people just want to say, you know what, let's start over from scratch. We're going to put a new line in. We're jumping from 30 cans a minute, and now we want to go to 300 cans a minute. That's a process that I went through at the brewery when we were scaling. We had operated one canning line, then we added a second canning line, tied them together, and then we got to a point where we had, it running around the clock, 17 employees working around the clock. And at that point in time, we knew, okay, we got to make some changes. This is not sustainable. And we ended up upgrading to a completely new filling line. And you have to filling lines grow exponentially when you start talking about speed. So it generally requires some more space and a lot more, resources and machinery to fully scale on the canning line side.
Mm-hmm. Do you see things maybe changing as flexibility becomes a bigger requirement, to where you can kind of, and I could be totally off on this, but do you think you'll be able to sell depalletizers that are able to adapt and you can charge based on features and throughput at that point? Or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, we have several levels of depals that we actually manufacture. We have our very low speed mobile one for really small operations, up to our standard cannabis depal. And then we just recently came out with one that we've dubbed the Magic Bus, that it's got pallet in-feed system, a pallet out-feed for the empty pallets. And they scale anywhere from, we started at about 30 cans a minute, you need a depal. And need some sort of a way to get the cans off. You're not going to feed cans to 30 cans a minute. And then our Magic Bus will handle up to 600 cans a minute. So, people are adapting and scaling. And as far as different products, our machines can handle, most depalletizers can handle multiple size products, but more and more people are looking at changeover options for the machinery. You got to have a certain rinse cage for a certain size can. But we try and build some of that adaptability. And when sourcing equipment, you should be looking at that and asking those questions and thinking about the future. We have seen so many, with the new seltzer craze that's gone on, we've seen numerous customers that have requested, like, hey, we're switching, or we're not switching, we're going to add 12-ounce steaks to our lines because we're coming out with a seltzer. So, we look at that equipment and look at their line and see what we can make sure that we can build that scalability and adaptability into their packaging lines.
Awesome. Similar question for you, Craig. How are you addressing scalability with automation and maybe flexibility as well in this ever-changing beverage world?
Well, one thing I definitely did for scalability is I've had a lot of friends start up breweries, and just knew other people that start up breweries that kind of bottleneck yourself from almost 6 months in. You're already looking for more space. So space-wise, we have, on the production side, we have about 20,000 square feet of production space, which right now we're only using about 8,000 square feet. So we have room to grow when we put the canning line, putting everything. So that's good. We really don't have any packaging equipment at this point. That's all kind of phase two. And then as far as the brew house side goes, ProBrew, they can put in new equipment into the board, and they can add, they can easily go into the programming and add more automation for when I bring in more tanks and everything. So it's all I would say scalability is probably more on the physical side at this point than anything.
Makes sense. Jake, you were just messaging me a point as well. Is there, and Jake, maybe you want to ask this because I want to make sure we get it kind of in your words versus my paraphrasing.
Yeah, you look at more and more automation across the industry now, where I can rent a robot to handle a CNC tending process. I don't need to take all that capital equipment and buy a robot, buy a palletizing system to do CNC tending. Have you guys heard similar stuff within the brewery industry, where instead of having this large upfront cost to capital automation equipment, do you guys see out there opportunity, or do you know of current companies that are renting the product? Matt, for example, you have a microbrew out there. Instead of a company renting, buying a full depalletizer unit, they're saying, hey, we'll pay you per can that we process through it. Do you see, machines as a service in the brewing industry?
I think Craig touched on this. He uses a mobile canning operation, and that's a perfect example of that. He wants to, obviously get cans out into the market, but he doesn't quite have the capital to put it out there. There's all kinds of mobile canning services that will come into your facility and set up for a day or 2 days or a couple days and can your product. So it's certainly alive and well. It's probably not as easy on the brewing side, because that equipment's large and hard to handle and needs facilities in-house like a chiller and things like that to service them. So in the packaging world, mobile canning is alive and well and thriving, and it certainly gives, it's expensive, but it's a good opportunity to at least get your feet wet with it and understand what your market demand is for, and get something out there in the marketplace so that you can kind of gauge. I think Craig will be able to determine at what point in time what size canning line do I need, based on what demand he's seeing from his mobile canning service.
Yeah, and so right now it is very expensive to do mobile canning. Having your own equipment to be able to put beer out into the market. Obviously, you have to pay up front for the machinery, but per case, obviously it goes way down, because I'm not only renting the can line itself for the day, but I'm also renting 2 guys that come in and can it. So because of that, we're actually not even distributing. The mobile canning is just for selling out of the tap room. So that way there's any kind of profit margin off of it. If we were going into the market, it would basically be a wash. What we pay for everything, materials on a small scale, and the machine and the people that run it, it's if we were selling to a distributor, which you have to in Georgia, I can't do self-distribution at this point. It's basically making $0. But yeah, it's they're good though. The guys that know how to do it well do a good job. I've heard some horror stories out there, because there's some companies that have started up and done mobile canning, and I've heard some really bad stories. Beer going bad, or the beer wasn't packaged properly. But the guys that I use a company called Ironheart Canning. They're kind of all up and down the East Coast, and they do a pretty good job.
Hey, we had another really interesting question come in from Matt Rosenberger. From a business and partnership perspective, when you're presenting your product for commercialization, do you highlight your process automation as a sales feature? So I guess the question might be, we'll start with Craig. How much, when you were talking to ProBrew about getting your brewery up and running, how much was automation part of the discussion? And then we'll kind of flip that when we go to you, Matt.
Yeah, it was pretty big. Going from manual systems at the other breweries I was at, and then getting to use a super high automated brew house at Celis, I knew I wanted some automation. And also I wanted to make sure that the company that I was working with understood all of the kind of custom stuff I wanted to do as well, because it wasn't just automation. There was a lot to it. And they were just the most knowledgeable as far as, I think, the automation and process piping and everything that goes along with that, because they work with some larger companies. Whereas there's a lot of brew house manufacturers out there that have some automation, but they're very geared toward just breweries, especially on the smaller, when you're talking to some of the smaller guys. But what's good about Prober is they actually work with a lot of other industries. They work with soda, and they work with Pepsi's one of their big customers, and they work with dairies. So they have a higher level of automation and process piping because of that, because they have very strict standards with those guys. So I just had to tell them what I wanted on the brewing side. That was a little bit different from what they were doing. They made a few brew houses before, but not a lot. And that was my big selling point, was that they work with some much larger companies that ask for a much higher level of automation than I'm going to need. So they should be able to very well grasp what I'm going to need.
Matt, from your perspective, when you're selling your equipment, how much are you talking about automation in that process?
That's the first thing we talk about. I mean, ultimately that's what we're selling. Is automation, and touting that and saying, hey, we can help reduce your labor on your lines. We can take the pain out of some of your packaging, your packaging points. I mean, it's what we're selling. So we push it hard. And I think, one thing that I'd like to add is automation has gotten so much less expensive over the years that it is becoming much more attainable for smaller companies to be able to do that. I mean, I'm 25 years in the beer industry. Looking at automation 15 years ago, it was virtually unattainable for small breweries. And in this day and age now, automation's become so much cheaper. Smaller breweries can afford to do it. It's a lot easier to implement. They have off-the-shelf solutions. I mean, 15 years ago, there weren't that many off-the-shelf solutions for small breweries. And now with, the internet, IoT, things like that, and web-based applications, it's within the reach of every small. I mean, even the nano brewers can implement some level of automation in their systems at a very affordable way. And then there's the school of YouTube. I mean, there's so much you can learn about automation that you can do yourself if you just have the wherewithal to go and research it and find out. I mean, I essentially taught myself automation from the school of YouTube, and learning what people are doing and seeing what the big guys have done and being like, I think that's something we need to do. I just need to figure out how to make it smaller and more affordable.
Love that. So I'm going to reset the conversation here in a second, just for folks that are joining us. But another similar question that came in for you, Matt, is why don't you see more robots kind of in like the depalletizing process? I'd love to hear your kind of, candid feedback on that.
As Chris said,
that's kind of what I was thinking.
We're starting to see a little bit more of that in some of the small, the price of robots is coming down. For what we do, I think, and the cost of a robot for the capital cost, I think that a robot might be a little bit excessive. It depends on once you start getting up to the 500 to 600 can a minute packaging. That's when you might start looking at robotic automation, more so for palletizing and or keg handling, where they're moving full cases at a time or full kegs at a time. But really, there's still a kind of a big cost barrier there too. And even though robots relatively take up a small footprint, if you actually look at the safety cage and the guarding and everything that you need around a robot versus a human being, it does take up a significantly larger footprint.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. I figured cost and everything that goes with it would probably be the driving factor behind that. But, I love what you guys have both said about automation coming down in price. So it's becoming more accessible. So real quick reset for anyone that's joining the live stream. We're here at Automate Forward. We're talking about automation in the beer world, in the beverage industry. We've got Craig from Round Trip Brewing and Matt from Ska Fabricating. So we're having a good conversation here. If you have a beer, we'd love to hear what you're drinking in the comments. I have one more kind of automation related question. Then I want to ask you some stuff about beverages and beers in general and some of the trends you're excited about. But, we've hinted at this throughout the conversation, and I think this applies to any small or medium sized business, but let's do it in the context of the beverage industry. How do you get more small to mid-sized breweries to adopt automation and technology? Craig, we'll start with you on this one.
Well, kind of like Matt talked about a little bit, automation 10 years ago in the beer world, I mean, you might as well be talking on, Martian. I mean, I think just not a lot of people have used it yet. I think as a little bit more gets introduced into the brewing world, I mean, you got to think a lot of these brew houses, especially the guys that have started 10 to 20 years ago, I mean, they're there and they're probably not moving. Because they might not be really getting bigger unless the company comes in and kind of retrofits and puts some automation. Like that's what they're going to be using until the company, isn't there anymore, pretty much. Mm-hmm. So I think in just the beer world in general, I mean, for the last 100 years, it's kind of been very slow to adapt. So because not a lot of brewers have used automation, it's kind of scary. I mean, to be honest, you're like, well, I'm not going to have my hands on it. And if I'm not having my hands on it, am I going to get the exact flavors and everything that I want? So I think that's kind of the biggest hurdle, just experience using it. Mm-hmm. If you can get some guys on it and kind of show them, hey, this isn't that scary. You just have to kind of know how it works and how it, had a little bit of knowledge on some of the systems, and having a great partner too helps as well, making sure that the automation is, if you get stuck in a spot, if something doesn't work right, you have somebody on the phone to call. So I think just experience getting people on it, because there's so many old brew houses out there. I mean, we're at 8,000 breweries in the country, and I bet 7,500, 7,000 of them at least are manual. Mm-hmm. So it's just getting brewers on it, and then is the owner willing to either retrofit, or is it going to be a new system? If it's a new system, is there going to be any new automation on there?
Matt, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Well, I think that the brewing world has had to adapt on the packaging side and bring automation. You put a filler in. I mean, you don't use manual fillers that much these days unless you're really, really small. So it's almost a necessary evil. They have to look at automation. So I think breweries have been more adept or more interested in automation on the packaging side. And when you're brewing, that's more of a batch. You're making a large batch, and it is more of a craft. So people are more used to we call hose jockeying and valve turning, versus being able to push buttons and stuff. Whereas on the packaging side, I mean, you're making widgets. You're making thousands and thousands of widgets a day. Mm-hmm. You've got to have some level of automation. So you have to adapt. It's not really an option. And trust me, from experience and having canned by hand for 5 years, many hours a day, it is a painful process, and it is one that is a complete waste of time and labor. So if you have any good business sense, you're going to look at automation on the packaging side right off the bat.
Love that. We're gonna switch things up. I want to ask you some questions about the beverage industry in general, and I feel like Alex asked a question that's just very blunt. I feel like it's a good way to kick things off. Hard seltzers, fad or here to stay? So you're both laughing. Craig, we'll start with you, and then we'll get Matt's take on this.
Yikes. I think they are here to stay. I don't know if they'll stay with, because there's a lot of craft guys that are getting into it. I just don't see it as a very crafty product, I guess is the best way to put that. Because, I mean, the beer world, at least the one that I've known in the past, 10, 12 years, has been like guys getting around beer, people getting around beers, and it's like you're really digging into it, and you're like, what's in this? And like you're super excited about it, and like what yeast to use. And with seltzer, it's just like, let's pump out some clear liquid that has some flavor in it. It's just a different mindset that I have not been used to, I guess. And we don't make one here. I don't know if we'll make one here. I don't really have any plans on doing it. But it's a money maker at the moment. And I think it's here to stay. I just don't know how many players there's going to be at the end. Because especially because all the big guys are doing it now. Yeah. Right? So, and they can really beat everybody else on price and distribution. So because of that, what's going to differentiate your seltzer as a small guy from what the big guys are doing? So that's kind of what my take is on it. I think it's definitely here to stay, greater than like what hard soda was, when we had all the, Notch Brothers root beer and all that. I think that's still out there. I don't really see it anymore, but I definitely think it has more legs than that. But it's just a different product than what I've been used to in the craft market, because brewers are making it, but it's not beer, but it's under the same umbrella tax-wise, I guess.
Sure. Matt, what's your take on it?
Well, most of the brewers that I talk to that are making seltzers usually say like, yeah, we're making a seltzer too. So I kind of echo what Craig's saying, is like, there's not as much character in a seltzer. Whether they're here to stay or not, I'm not quite sure. Wine coolers were cool once.
Wine coolers aren't cool anymore.
So I think there's a little bit of a fad, but I don't think they're like going away. I think there's a rush to market with them right now for everyone to try. I mean, they're selling, and a lot of times, I can speak from Ska. It's like there's a hole on the shelf for it. We should make one. If we can make some money doing it, we should try it and see. And I think in this day and age, with the beverage world in general is trending like crazy. We talk in our line of work. We talk to so many people doing all these crazy different beverages and tropics and all kinds of crazy stuff out there that people you got to try and see what sells and then figure out what's coming next and be looking ahead and try that. I know some breweries are adapting and doing some contract packaging outside of beer and seltzers too, and using some excess capacity that they had. So I think it's seltzers are here to stay. I think they're going to scale back, but I think there's going to be something else that comes next.
Yeah. Well, that's actually the next question I wanted to ask you both. Like, I kind of feel the same way with you guys about hard seltzers. I'm not personally a big hard seltzer drinker. I get it from a business standpoint. It's something to add to the mix that, for someone that's showing up to the brewery that's not a beer drinker, keeps them around, gets them spending money. But you're right. I think describing that there's not as much character, at least, you can't differentiate it the same way when you're talking shop with your fellow brewers. But what trends are you guys excited about? Because there's always something new coming in the beverage world. Matt, what's a trend or two that you're really stoked about right now?
Weed.
All right. Yeah, that's a very good Colorado answer. And we see that. I mean, automation in that space is coming up all the time. Dive into that a bit more. I'm a partner in another cannabis seltzer company. We make a cannabis THC infused seltzer, and I see cannabis beverages having some market potential. I'm partially biased because I'm involved in it in a startup, but I'm starting to see other states and other companies that are adapting it and bringing it on. So I see something there. I don't know how big it's going to be, but as states start coming on legalization, the beverage is a format that people are familiar with, especially people who haven't tried a bunch of cannabis and are interested in smoking it. It's a great vehicle for delivery.
We're talking low dosage products, microdose products. I certainly see some trending there. We've put in a handful of canning lines in cannabis facilities already, several in Canada, several here in the U.S. So it's something I see has some potential for growth. And then, I spoke about this a little earlier, just in general, there's so many different crazy beverages coming out right now. I mean, between kombuchas, coffee, hard kombucha, soft kombucha, seltzer water, alkaline water. One thing that I think is a really positive trend is the moving away from plastic and going towards aluminum packaging. I think as long as it's more sustainable, I think that more people will be geared towards, they're familiar with the can. I think the can is here to stay, and I think more and more beverages are going to trend that way as well.
Yeah, you just blew up the comments there. We got a lot of chuckles with your response. So that was great, Craig. What are some of your trends that you're stoked about right now?
I think Matt's thinking a little bit more at the 100,000 foot level, being having a bunch of guys working for him right now. I'm working for me. I manage myself through the production schedule, so I'm a little bit more in the weeds right now. I just opened 5 weeks ago, so I'm looking ahead toward 2 weeks what the brewing schedule is at this point, instead of what the big trends are right now. I love hard kombucha. I mean, I drink it. I drink kombucha in general. I think it's a great product. So, but yeah, I'm not quite there at that level at this point. I think I'm just focused on what we're doing, and what we're doing is interesting. In general, I think we're doing German style beers, but trying to elevate German style beers by doing some hybrid styles and some traditional styles as well. But yeah, that's I'm kind of focused on what's going on in these 26,000 square feet, and we don't distribute yet, so I'm not too worried about the market at this point. I'm just trying to make sure the tap room's a cool place to be.
Craig, I have another question for you. I have to ask who Chris McCoskey is, because this individual has been throwing a lot of questions your way.
Man, he'll wear you out. Yeah, that's my brother. So yeah, I'm sure.
Okay.
He was quick to click the link to join this.
I love it. Well, he wants to know about the Atlanta United. What is your prediction on their record this season? That's a fair question.
They're probably going to win some games. Some of them will be lost. Some of them will be won. People will drink beer. Hopefully, it's in our brewery while they're watching the game. That's my prediction.
I love it. I love it. Matt, I know that's not in your area, but any Colorado-related sports commentary you want to give while we're on the topic?
No, I'm not a sports person, so count me out of that conversation.
All right. That's fair. Well, we're getting into the final throes of this discussion. It's been a lot of fun. I really appreciate everything you've been sharing with us today. We'll keep an eye on the comments if more questions come in. But my last question for you guys, and I end all my podcasts with this question, is what's something that we haven't talked about yet that you wish I would have asked you guys? So Matt, let's start with you. Something that we haven't touched on that maybe you'd like to end on.
Oh man. Gosh, you caught me off guard on this one.
Take your time.
I see, I guess, where is, we talk about automation, but where is more automation farther along? Other than in packaging beer, what other automation, systems or places for automation within the brewery? I mean, there's a lot of, obviously, in the manufacturing side, but there are a lot of systems out there for managing these schedules and helping to automate that. I mean, I'd like to see more development on the production scheduling automation side. I mean, I'm sure that there's probably some software out there, and there's some things that have come a long way, but even 10 years ago, we were at the brewery, we were guinea pigging multiple software platforms to help us automate the scheduling process. And I think it's come a long ways still, and I think more adaptation of that within some of the smaller breweries could be beneficial as well.
Awesome. Craig, what about yourself? I know you had a little bit more time to think than Matt. So if anything else comes to mind, Matt, we can circle back to you. But Craig, what about you?
Well, I'll answer Matt's question a little bit. So, Matt, do you use any platforms right now? We're actually using a platform called Ecos.
Yep, we're using Ecos now too.
Yeah, and I have not dug into it too far at this point. And honestly, for my production planning, just because brewers don't like to change, I use Google Sheets a lot. So that's my production planning is Google Sheets and a fermentation report. So that's how I do my production planning. So, as far as things I'd like to see, no, I mean, I would just like to see more brewers kind of catch on, and even if you have an old brew house, you could have a company come in and do some automation and kind of like what Matt was saying, you can retrofit a lot of this stuff, and it's so much cheaper than it was. I mean, 5 years ago, it was almost not unheard of. But I think 5 years from now, it'll be much more normal that somebody could come in and retrofit your piping, throw in a couple automated valves, and take the brewer out of the equation a little bit more, just to save a little bit of labor and gain some consistency and better beer. So I think that's where not a lot of new brew houses may not even be made in this next couple of years, because a little bit of downturn with COVID and everything. I see a lot of retrofit stuff happening, because that's probably where a lot of the only money is going to be made on a lot of brew house manufacturing stuff right now, is if that happens.
All right. As we wrap things up, question for both of you guys: what's the best way to connect with your businesses and breweries? Craig, how can we find out more on Round Trip?
Yeah, we're on Instagram and Twitter on Round Trip Beer. I know we're on Facebook too. I'm not looking at the Facebook, but I know we're on there. We're on TikTok, I think. Do some TikTok stuff. I don't know what that is. Some dances or something. I have no idea. There's got to be something else new that I'm not familiar with that we're on as well. I don't handle marketing, obviously. I stay on. There's a dividing wall, physical dividing wall, and an emotional one.
Sure.
I make the beer, it goes to the taps, and then my wife, she runs the tap room side, and then we have another partner that's in marketing. So I chime in, but I try to stay away too, just so I don't get in trouble.
We just need to know where we can drink your beer. That's the most important. We want to find you when we're down in Atlanta.
Yeah, we got a really cool tap room. We got 6,000 square feet of event space that you can rent out to. We have a private event rental room, and I can my beer, but it's only for sale here at the tap room for about the first year until we figure out how we want to deal with distribution. But I want to have full control for this first year until we got all of our processes dialed in.
Love awesome. That. And we've got folks in the comments applauding you on your innovative use of TikTok. So cheers to you on that. Matt, where can we connect with Ska Fab and the other things you're involved in?
SkaFabricating.com is, it's our website. Obviously, that's the best place to go gather information about what we do and our equipment. We've got Facebook, Instagram as well. But yeah, our website. I don't even know if we're on TikTok yet. That's. I think I'm getting too old for that. Maybe, I don't know.
I'm too old for it.
Yeah. But yeah, our website's the most informative place to go, and it outlines all of our equipment, what we do, and quite honestly, we're in 50 states, and I consider every brewery that we're in one of our showrooms, and breweries are pretty open to opening their doors and showing you around and ask people about our equipment at your local brewery that has our equipment in there.
Awesome. Well, hey, we appreciate you jumping on as we finish things off here. Jake, I know we're all one beer deep at this point, so let me know if I forget anything here. But for those of you that have been watching, thanks for tuning in. Make sure you're attending the Automate Forward event as well. That will be running for free through the end of the week, so make sure to do that. Jake just popped up the link where you can access that. Jake, any big things you want to announce as we get to the end here?
No, this was just great. It was great learning about beer and automation and just sitting back, having a much more casual conversation. So, thanks guys. Thanks Matt and Craig for joining us for Manufacturing Happy Hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This was a lot of fun. So for everyone that's been watching, stay innovative, stay thirsty. We'll catch you here again soon. Make sure you check out Round Trip Brewing, check out Ska Fabricating, and one more time, Matt, Craig, thanks so much for joining us today. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks.